and the list of things Mom said go on and on and on. I thought, you know, we've heard all these mom-isms, and I thought, well, I can come up with a new one. I remember one time when my daughter and her mother were shopping. And my daughter was early teenage years. Early teenage years where everything is embarrassing if it comes from a parent, you know? And so they're shopping in this department store, and my daughter is at this rack, and a couple of racks over is her mother, and all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, her mother says, "Bree, do you still need new underwear?" And all of a sudden, there was no daughter. She was hiding under the clothes rack. And you could see this clothes rack wanting to go out of the store, you know. And it's also a story that they do not tell the same. When my daughter tells the story, she'll say, "And she yelled clear across the store, 'Do you need underwear?' And when her mother tells it, 'Oh, you were just in the next aisle.'" Yeah, you know, perspective. Moms care for us. Well, this is Mother's Day, and we have a wonderful picture up here on the screen. There's a reason some people think they can do anything. They listen to their mothers. We're getting to a nicer side of mothers here. You know who this picture is? It is Julia Ward Howe. You know who Julia Ward Howe is? She is the one who also, besides what you said, she is the one who wrote the words to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And she is one of the two women who are credited with starting Mother's Day. Did you know that? And when Julia Ward Howe and Anne Reeves Jarvis, I don't know if they knew each other, but they were both about the same mission at the same time in their lives, back in the early to middle 1800s. And they were both very upset with the way people treated each other, especially the way people who were imprisoned or ill or recovering orphans or whatever were being treated. They were upset that they were treated like second-class citizens, and that it was a disgrace in their eyes that these people were treated that way by other human beings, as if they didn't notice that these people that they were caring for were human beings as well. And they thought it was time to put an end to this. Of course, this was the uprising that also kind of led to women's suffrage, because the attitude and the awareness of women and their rights was growing through the country. And so these two women started set ideas in place that started Mother's Day. What's neat and interesting about Julia is that she came from a very wealthy family. And she was used to having things done for her, and she was used to having clothing, whatever kind she wanted, and in abundance. And then she got married to Mr. Howe. And Mr. Howe was a very frugal person, and also believed very strongly that the woman's place was quietly in the home, and that the husband's place was to rule the roost and to take care of everything, including any inheritance that the wife brought in from her family. And so he took over all of the finances, including her inheritance. And things were not going well from the very beginning, and she was a poet and a writer, and he tried to keep her from getting her poetry and her writings out into the public because he would be embarrassed the things she was saying about women having rights and women being able to think and women being able to manage money. That was not to be heard in that day, especially from his wife. Well, a few years later they divorced, they separated, but it wasn't until after he had wasted just about all of her inheritance on bad investments. And so she was a working mother all of a sudden with 6 children and taking care of them and trying to make a living, but she was able to write and became known, and her writings began to sell and become popular so that she was able to raise her family and also have a voice in what the world was doing. And so she wrote this hymn, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, after visiting troops and the despicable conditions of armies and fighting. And she wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And if you are familiar with that hymn, it talks a lot about how we can see God, we can see Jesus in these camps, because these men hang on to what they believe, and it's what gets them through. And so she wrote this hymn, and it became a well-known hymn because it was so encouraging to the people at the time. Now it's just a fun hymn to march to, and sing. But she also then wrote a proclamation. And the Mother's Day proclamation went like this, because Mother's Day originally was not about how sweet and intimate relationships we have with our mothers, or buying them roses or anything like that. It was about calling all women to unite and to change the world in which we live. And here was her proclamation. Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether our baptism be of water or of tears. We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands will not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, the women of one country, will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel. Let them meet first as women, to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, each bearing after his own time the sacred impress not of Caesar, but of God. In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask that a general Congress of women without limit of nationality may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient, and at the earliest period consider with its objects to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, the great and general interests of peace. Doesn't sound much like Mother's Day, does it? but it was a call to these women all over the world to come and be the people that we are meant to be. In a culture that believes strongly in the mothers being those who brought nurture and brought love and brought all of the finery of being kind and courteous to each other, she was calling out for these mothers to come together and take all that loving that you have taught your children and share it with other mothers so that the world will know way too much love and make it incapable of going to war, and make it incapable of fighting with one another. Oh, if that were true. Oh, if that were true. There was a conference at a church meeting out in Chicago, and it was full of mainly white people. And in the middle of the presentation at the assembly, a Native American man stood up, who was a member of the Congress that was meeting at that time in that church. And he stood up and he looked around and he said, if all of us would rise up individually, we would look around and see that most of us today live as individuals. Most of us today live as individuals because we have forgotten that God called us to be community. That God called us to share what we have. That God called us to love one another. And when we read the scripture that we presented today in the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you, as I have loved you. I am in the Father, so that you might be in me. I have come and said, love one another, so that my joy might be in you, and that your joy might be complete by loving one another. The Native American ended his little talk by saying, oh, if we could just live that way. If we could just live that way. And I'm here to ask you today, why don't we live that way? Why don't we live that way? Partially because if any of us go out and, especially running for office or anything, and talk about health insurance that might cover everybody, or if we go out and talking about sharing homes and sharing produce together, or sharing anything, then too often we hear, the first thing we hear is socialism. It's socialism. And if we can name something socialism, then we can put it away and we don't have to do it because everybody knows that's bad. But sharing doesn't necessarily mean a form of government. Sharing with one another and bringing up the goods that I have more than I need of, and I can share them with you, doesn't depend on a government. It depends on having a heart that really, truly loves all of God's people. Having a heart that really, truly loves all of God's people. And then being willing to see everybody we see as one of God's people who might have need, who might have the opportunity to welcome you into their life, to help them. Why don't we live that way more than we do? Because for the most part, we're individualists, and we look out after ourselves. When someone in the church gets sick, we're really good at taking care of them. When we see a need outside of us, we're really good at forming as a church and going out and helping with that need. We're great at that, and that's a wonderful gift. that this church especially, as I've seen, goes out and helps when the need is there. But you know what? The need is there every day. The need is there every day. And as we walk through town, there are times when someone is needing us. And it's not a church project to come and help them. It's not an organization in town to come and help them. You look around and the only one on the street is you and someone in need. And you wonder, what am I going to do? I've been here myself. I've been in that situation myself and have walked across the street to go around it. I have been there myself and hurried up and turned around and gone the other way, so I didn't have to deal with someone lying on the sidewalk or someone that I knew had been drinking way too much. I just left them alone. That was their decision. They got that situation themselves. It doesn't affect me. And sometimes I'm just like the priests and the rabbis that were on the road to Jericho and just walked around to the other side. We have been taught to be afraid. We have been taught to not trust. We have been taught to look out after ourselves. And maybe if we look out after the words of Christ more fully in our lives, we could overcome the fear, we could overcome the hesitation, and we could not be afraid of those that we see in need. And I think we can also then find out how good it feels afterwards when you have met a new friend, just for 30 seconds to a minute. I used to live in a neighborhood in Claremore, Oklahoma, and it was one of these neat streets that the street coming into the neighborhood turned and went two ways, and there was a cul-de-sac at the end, either end of the street. And so you had to come out the same way you went in. And so we didn't have a lot of traffic. And so the neighbors got to know each other a lot. The kids played in the streets. You know, it was one of the few times in my life I could tell my daughter, would you just go play in the street? And she would, and she'd be safe. And we knew each other, and we knew who had what. When it came to tools, when it came to patio furniture, when it came to baking utensils and everything else, we could say, oh, we're having a party, we need 6 extra lawn chairs. Well, that would be John. Or we need the rototiller this weekend. Oh, that would be Peggy. You know? And we would know who we could borrow this from. And it was a close-knit neighborhood. And we were totally different when it came to careers and economic levels. But we all respected each other. And none of us had to buy everything because all of us bought something. Why don't we live that way more? Why don't we live that way? Why don't we live that way? I think that there's no better time to really try to live that way than on Mother's Day. On Mother's Day, where we have these wonderful women in our lives who love us and teach us of love and how to play fair with each other. And maybe if we have listened to what our mothers taught us, some of those momisms that we make fun of now, then we could do anything we wanted. But even more importantly, the world could be a better place.